Thank you. I'm trying to gavel loudly, lightly because apparently we're giving out fines for people who gavel too heavy. That is a joke that just happened on the floor, so I mean that in jest. But thank you everybody for being here. The first thing I want to do is go back to yesterday and just be accurate and transparent. I mentioned something that I remembered about school boards and agendas. I was not able to find it, and I think I was incorrect. So I did want to say that and be transparent about that. There was also a handout that I'm going to come back to in just a moment because it wasn't inaccurate, but it I think kind of could if you're not in ed budget, you kind of might not totally have seen what you understood there, but it also didn't change the totals significantly. But I just, since everybody is not on ed budget, I did just kind of want to bring a little attention to that. So today we are having discussion and action on Senate Bill 87. And I am going to begin by offering an amendment. Thank you. And I'm going to let Jason explain this one, but it deals with some of the special groups that were proposed in this bill. Jason, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. The balloon that's been passed out is titled Public Safety Officer Balloon. It's on page 2, and it addresses the new categories for eligibility for children whose parent is in the active duty with a branch of the Armed Forces of the United States, or who is a EMS provider, firefighter, or law enforcement officer. The amendment expands that to also include those parents in those occupations who either died while serving or as a result of the injuries sustained in performing their duties, or were injured or disabled while performing their duties. And those new terms, injury and disability and public safety officer, are lifted from current law, KSA 75-4364, which is a statute that provides tuition benefits for students who have a parent who meet these categories of active duty military and public safety officer who have either died or been injured or disabled while in the line of duty. And so it's tying into that benefit and bringing those terms and conditions into the eligibility for the tax credit for low-income scholarship student eligibility definition.
Thank you. Questions for the reviser? Representative Nguyen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason, does either of those prohibit layering or stacking of the scholarship?
I'm not prepared to address the College Post-Secondary Scholarship Act. That this is referencing the low-income student scholarship program. Is just a one scholarship under this program for the student.
And repeat again, what did you say the link?
Oh, the link is mainly using the same terminology. So if a student would qualify under the Post-Secondary Benefit Act, that same terminology would apply to students under this Low Credit Scholarship Act.
And is that the 75-4364?
Yes, that's correct.
Post-secondary.
That's the Post-Secondary Benefit Act, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions for the reviser? Representative Chauncey, did you have a question? Any other? So is any other discussion that you We are done hearing the revisor, but if a question pops up, we can certainly come back to Jason. Is there discussion on this amendment? Seeing none, the chair moves adoption of the amendment as published. And a second from Representative Pishney. Last chance for discussion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Anybody would like to be recorded? The Representative Stogsdill is a no. We will move on. Are there other people with other amendments or discussion? Representative Pishney.
Just discussion, Madam Chair, not any amendment. I am somewhat concerned with regard to things that we heard during the hearing that don't necessarily compare apples to apples. And so I want to clarify a couple of things. One is there was reference to vouchers, and this is not a voucher program. This is a tax credit program. There was reference to tax deductible. This is not tax deductible. This is a tax credit. So as we're voting for this, I hope that we really have thought about the terminology that's been used and so forth, and that we're really thinking of what this bill is about and not mixing it up with other terminology. Let's see, I had a couple of notes. I guess that was mainly it. The last thing I would say, there was reference to 529 plans and other things, and yes, those are definitely beneficial, and my wife and I have used the 529 plans to fund for our grandchildren, but that's not the same as what this program is. So thank you for that, allowing me to make those clarifications, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome. Any other discussion? Yes, you may. Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For Jason, help me remember, I know I'll say the flow chart for a SGO, a scholarship granting organization, can an individual get the tax credit?
Jason?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee, under Section 3 of the bill on page 3, down there in line 37, there's allowed a credit against the tax liability imposed upon a taxpayer pursuant to the Kansas Income Tax Act, Privilege Tax Act, or the privilege tax upon a National Baking Association, et cetera. So yes, an individual could make a contribution and receive, I believe, a tax credit against their tax liability.
Did you have a follow-up, Representative?
Yes, please. The individual makes the contribution to the SGO?
That's correct.
Oh, okay. And you said that was Section 3, page 3, line?
Line 37 is where that begins.
Madam Chair, sorry. I just have your amendment.
You're welcome. Any other discussion? Representative Hill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't just ask for discussion on the entire amendment, but I do have some concerns about the term public safety officer. I am not I do not understand what it is about being a EMT, a firefighter, or a law enforcement officer that makes those professions necessarily more deserving of their children receiving a scholarship than a pastor, a teacher, a farmer, a construction worker, or any number of other professions that we could put in. So I would propose an amendment. I would propose an amendment that we strike out in section B, first I, and shift the numbers accordingly, leaving in double I and triple I. Yep. That's true. That is correct. Yep.
Jason, why don't you explain the intent of that?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my understanding from the representative is his intent in the amendment is to still allow a student to be eligible for a scholarship if their parent was a public safety officer who was injured or disabled or who had died as a result of an injury sustained while performing duties as a public safety officer. The motion would be to strike there in the balloon on page 2, capital B, lowercase I, just that line.
Is there a second for that amendment? Representative Getz is the second. Is there discussion? Or questions? Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you explain that again, Jason? You're striking capital B, lower I, you're striking that, right?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee, under the amendment, a student would not be eligible if their parent was a firefighter, EMS provider, or law enforcement officer unless that parent had been injured or disabled while performing duties or died as a result of injury sustained while performing duties.
So if you strike that BI, where then is a public safety officer in your list of people?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I would ask for the technical authorization to insert public safety officer as appropriate for 2 little I and 3 little I to specify that.
It's not there. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Representative Chauncey?
Just for clarification, Jason, that doesn't completely exempt the firefighters, EMTs and stuff from the scholarship if they meet the income guidelines?
Madam Chair, that is correct. The income guidelines are a separate and distinct criteria.
Okay, thank you, Jason.
Further questions or discussion? Seeing none, Representative, would you like to close your motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I close.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. And the motion carries. We don't record votes, so that's okay, unless someone asks to be recorded. Okay, no worries. We're all good. Is there further? So we are back to discussion on the bill as amended. Is there any further discussion or amendments? Representative Featherston.
Thought about a lot of ways to fix this bill and make it acceptable, but that seems pointless at this point. There is no way I will be supporting this. There is no accountability for taxpayer dollars. It places people on different playing fields. There's no income limit for some people, so we don't even know if we're helping truly poor people. The 250% trigger is far above the 130% trigger that signifies at-risk funding and free lunches. Speaking of free lunches, we're doling out an extra $15 million to wealthy donors when we have hungry children in this state that we couldn't find $5 million for. And then lastly, special education. We're funding wealthy donors, people who could donate up to $500,000 and carry it over many years And we are not funding special education, which is defunding the districts I represent and the county I represent to the tune of $109 million every year. And my constituents would certainly not want to see money going to the wealthy when it should be going to our special education and our other students in public schools who meet all accountability requirements and welcome every student to their door.
Any other discussion or amendments? Representative Chauncey?
Just one quick question, I guess. The way I understand this bill is the $500,000 donations, that's from private individuals, that's not taxpayer money. Am I correct that we're donating the money?
Jason?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the $500,000 limit is the amount of contributions a taxpayer is allowed in any one tax year and for purposes of claiming a tax credit, and then the taxpayer gets a tax credit for up to 75% of the amount contributed. It is in the form of a tax credit, which goes against any tax liability that the taxpayer would have, and if the credit exceeds the taxpayer's tax liability in a tax year, the credit may be carried forward and applied in a future tax year.
All right, thank you, Jason.
Jason, just for clarity, is the 250% existing law, or is that something that we would be voting to change today?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, that is existing law.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that distinction, that that is law as it stands. So your vote does not change that 250% one way or the other today. Representative Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the $500,000 is for the whole program, not per person, correct?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the $500,000 limit is per taxpayer making a contribution to a scholarship granting organization. The current law is a $10 million tax credit limit on the aggregate amount of tax credits the state will allow under the program. Under Senate Bill 87, that limit is being increased to $15 million immediately upon enactment, and may be increased by up to 25% in future tax years, up to an aggregate total cap of $25 million.
Thank you.
Representative Pishney.
First of all, Madam Chair, I apologize for being out of order a little bit ago, and to the representative. But secondly, of clarification, Jason, this is not a refundable tax credit where they would get money back if they've exceeded the tax that they owe, is my understanding. It's a non-refundable one that they can carry over.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, that is correct.
Thank you. Any further discussions? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason, on the same scenario we were just speaking of, so the $375,000, which is 75% of $500,000 in that scenario, if they were not to receive that tax credit, where would that money have gone otherwise?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I presume that if the taxpayer had a tax liability of $375,000 and this credit was not available to offset that tax liability, then the taxpayer would have that tax liability to the state of Kansas for $375,000.
Thank you for clarifying.
Representative Featherston, and then Representative Wynn.
I just have a question for the reviser. Could you explain to us deduction versus tax credit versus refundable tax credit, please?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I am going to take a stab at this as I am not the designated tax reviser for our office. However, tax deductions are deductions against how your gross income is calculated, and then the tax rate is applied to that, and then a tax credit is applied to offset your tax liability that has been determined. Refundable credits are tax credits that can be, if the tax credit exceeds the tax liability of the taxpayer, then the difference is paid by the state directly to the taxpayer as a refundable tax credit. Carry forward or carry over tax credits are ones that are not refundable, but the amount of tax credit that exceeds the tax liability can be carried forward into a future tax year and used against tax liability in a future tax year.
Representative Nguyen, and then Schreiber.
And thank you, Madam Chair. And I hate to ask, Elena, I've got the numbers for 2024, amount spent, what's the word? Provided, I guess. Is that the 5.5 million in 2024? I got 8.4 million, 7.8 million, and then 5.5 million a square. Point being, as she's looking, Madam Chair, I'm concerned about, it used to be 10 million, then I don't know the exact year it went to 15 million, but now we're capping at 25 million, when for this year was 2024, 5.5 million. Okay, so that's why I have a square around it.
Elena, do you want to put that on the record in the microphone? So the answer to Representative Nguyen's question. You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Elena Rutter, Legislative Research. Representative Nguyen is correct that the 5.5 million is the amount of tax credits reported for tax year 2024.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Representative Nguyen, you may continue.
Just very concerned, why is the max now so exploded to 25 million? I guess it's a rhetorical question, unless you have the answer.
I do not have the answer. Thank you. Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm going to test Jason's knowledge on taxes again, but from the website, I think this was the Catholic Education Foundation website, that somebody gets a $75,000 tax credit. So if it was a maximum of $500,000, it's $375,000. That the other 25% that does not create that tax credit, that could also be used as a charitable donation, is my understanding.
Jason.
At least that's what's on their website. I'm sorry.
So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, as I understand the question, a taxpayer makes a $500,000 contribution to a scholarship granting organization. The taxpayer then claims the maximum 75% or $375,000 of that under the Tax Credit for Low-Income Student Scholarship Act. And the question on the remaining $125,000, I believe to the extent that the scholarship granting organization is an agency for which contributions would be tax deductible under federal law, such as 501c3, C4, you know, what have you, then yet I believe that remaining $125,000 contribution could potentially be sought after, although whether that would be a deduction or a credit, I would have to defer to my tax colleagues as to that, because you would be falling under different law to try and claim that $125,000 contribution that couldn't be claimed under this tax credit program.
Right. I would assume it's a deduction. Maybe I used the word.
I believe so myself, but I'm not going to speak conclusively on that in this committee.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm not supporting this bill either, but you know, when I went out to the, and primarily I think most of the schools that would take advantage of this are Catholic schools, and I went to the Catholic Education Foundation, and I believe their education category or what they have in their foundation for education through all the different schools is about 43 million. And it seems to have grown quite a bit since this tax program has gone into effect. I wasn't able to find the Wichita Diocese or Salina or Dodge City Diocese, but you know, I think there's been discussion just within the legislature in the past about on public education that some have questioned the reserves that K-12, public K-12 schools have on their balance sheets, and that they should spend those before additional money is granted from the state. You know, I think the same thing could be applied with the Education Foundation dollars that they have assigned. Now, some of those are assigned to various schools. I understand that it's not just one big pot of money, but I think they have some wherewithal to offer additional scholarships and instead of using this state bill or potential state law. Thank you.
Representative Schmoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out the fact that we are talking about donors who are donating, whether they donate to this particular program and get this benefit and we're helping Kansas kids, or whether they donate to Missouri where it's 100% and they help Missouri kids. These are people who are going to be donating money anyway, and we're really counting chickens before they're hatched here when we start talking about the tax money that we're just not going to get, because chances are they're going to find a way to donate, and I would prefer them to donate to Kansas students. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other discussion or amendments? I'm sorry, Representative Chauncey.
Yeah, just to touch on the representative's comments. Again, it is donations, correct? And we're given a tax credit, so it feels to me like we're trying to count on the money that may not even be there, because if someone chooses not to donate and goes and buys a bunch of material for their houses they're going to build next year, we lose that money anyway, because that's 100% tax deduction also. So we're not giving that money. The kids lose the opportunity for the scholarships if we don't consider that. So me, if I had the $500,000 to donate and you want to say, well, we're going to spend your money how we see fit and give it to whatever program we want to give it to, I may reconsider and reinvest my money somewhere else. And so that's one concern that I have of trying to say that we're losing taxpayer money. In a sense, we're looking at losing all the money in doing this. So I feel now that I will be supporting this bill.
Thank you, Representative Pishney, and then Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In a previous life, I was a financial counselor and investment advisor, and I want to recommend Jason to teach a money class the next time, because he got it right on the deductions and the credits. To my previous representative across the table, some of those funds that we're seeing in those foundations and so forth are endowed, where they cannot use the principal. They're just able to use the income. So even if they have 40 million in a fund, I don't know what the breakout is, but most of it is not annual money. Most of it is endowed money that generates some annual money for those schools. And I know, like in the Dodge City Diocese, they've just recently become eligible to accept tax credit contributions. And then absolutely correct, there's a difference between the tax credit and the tax deductibility, and that depends on the organization on whether or not they'll allow the combination of the two, rather than the donor, him or herself. So, thank you.
You're welcome, Representative. Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the robust discussion on this, and I think there's a lot of information has been brought out. We're not really seeing any more amendments, so I'm going to go ahead and move that we pass Senate Bill 87 out favorably.
As amended, Representative.
As amended, I'm sorry.
Thank
yes,
you. And a second by Representative Hubert. Before we go to discussion, I mentioned earlier something that I was waiting for, and it walked in the door in the forum of Dylan. I don't think it really changes the debate very much, but I just wanted to make sure that the pie chart you guys saw yesterday didn't attribute things exactly the way we normally attribute them, and if you're on K through 12 ed budget, the way you would see them. So I asked research to make another pie chart just to explain the difference. It doesn't change the overall concept, but while we're talking a lot about school funding formulas and where money comes from, I want to make sure that we're very clear on that. Dylan? You may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Dylan Deere. I'm the Assistant Director for Fiscal Affairs. I work for the Legislative Research Department. So this table before you has the FY25 approved budget. For those of you directly involved in appropriations, that's not the budget that we're currently revising. It is the budget we're currently revising, but this is based upon the pre-revised budget. So this is just what you had when you were leaving last year. So what has been done here is so technically higher education, obviously, schools for the blind and deaf, and the State Library and State Historical Society are all considered to be within the education function. Obviously, schools and for the blind and deaf are much more directly related to sort of K-12 education. And so what we've done here is we've broken up K-12 education, higher education, State Library and Historical Society, and schools for the blind and deaf, each in different pies, so that you can sort of see how those are as a representation of SGF expenditures in 25.
Thank you. So normally when legislative research reports on the budget, all the education things they put into three pie slices. And yesterday's chart had two of them combined in school for the deaf and the blind. I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of the money that we put in there, and normally it's in the other category, which is shared with the library and the historical society. And I just wanted to make sure that you guys had the full picture, and I'd be happy to let you ask questions. Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for bringing in our friend from tax. So if I'm looking at this and 46.4% goes to K-12 education, which is what this bill addresses, and I am a donor, I choose to give $100. So in my estimation, 46% of that would have gone to education, and the remaining 54% would have gone to things like public safety, human services, agriculture.
So I'll admit that I am not familiar with the tax bill that you're currently revising, but I would be more than willing to defer to Jason on how those funds are distributed.
Jason, did you feel a bus just run over you?
I tried to save you, Jason.
And you try to phone a friend. Jeez. Madam Chair, members committee, to the extent that the taxpayer would have a tax liability and there is no credit to offset that tax liability and they pay the tax money in, the revenues would then be arguably divided as you see in the pie graph according to the percentages presented.
Dylan.
You know, and Jason is 100% correct, but I would note that there's not a direct correlation between revenues brought in and expenditures made, which if you look at the profile, you can see there's an inequality between total revenues and total expenditures. So looking at the amount of revenue you get in any particular fiscal year against expenditures is probably difficult because dollars are fungible.
Thank you. Representative Featherston, did you have a follow-up? Okay. Representative Hill?
You know, I hate to interject in here, but it's way more complicated than this because if you're making a $100 tax deductible donation, that is, I assume, against your income tax. A good portion of K-12 education is funded through property tax, And then there's another portion that would be funded through income or sales tax. So it's way more complicated than $100 is divided up to K-12 education. $100 would go into the state general fund. And then the state general fund, the way it is divided up, would determine where your $100 would actually go to. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Dylan, thank you for coming with us today. Anybody else with a question for Dylan? Really, my main point in bringing this, I just kind of wanted an accurate total picture of how much is spent educating children who fall between kindergarten and 12th grade, and $20 million on the School for the Deaf and the Blind. Just wanted to make sure we understood that. Dylan, thank you very much.
The last comment, if
Yes, you may.
If you go out there and look at House Bill 2007 and look at the bill explainer, you can see our updated position, the House's updated position on K-12 spending as it came out of committee.
Thank you very much. So we will continue discussion on the motion by Representative Hill to pass the bill as amended favorably. Any other discussion? Representative Wolf.
This is to a representative that asked about how much for 2024 had been spent so far. And the reason it's so low is because we haven't all filed our taxes yet. We're in the middle of 2024, correct?
Jason or Elena, would one of you know the answer to that question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I forgot to note this yesterday and earlier. That number, the $5.5 million, it's included in the Department of Education's report on the tax credit scholarship, and they do have a note that the 2024 tax year contribution and credit amounts are as of the end of 2024, and they have not been finalized.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any Representative Nguyen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the point I was making, however, was that from its inception, it has never been exhausted. Now, one could say, well, we have to, that's one reason you have to expand. And I would counter that. That is not the reason to expand. When you are not, in my opinion, actually staying true to the original intent of low income. One last question, if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, you may.
This is not a tax question, but you can answer.
We're so relieved.
So, yeah, Jason just said, phew. So then, are there any, let's say tuition is average, I think in one of the testimonies, like $3,000, you have up to $8,000. So there is no limit, there's no maximum. So whatever the tuition is, the SGO can bank the money and just give the tuition, correct?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, there is a limit on the scholarships that can be awarded of not more than $8,000 in any one year to an eligible student. There's also a requirement, I can look up, but I believe there's a requirement for the SGO to spend at least 90% of its contributions it receives on awarding scholarships.
Madam Chair, please.
Yes, you may.
Of its total contributions or for that specific child, individual?
I believe of the contributions that it receives under the tax credit program, it has to spend at least 90% on scholarship awards.
Per year?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions? Seeing none, the chair calls the question. All those in favor of passing Senate Bill 87 favorably as amended, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. No. Does anybody wish to be recorded? Representative Miller, Featherston, Ruiz, Nguyen, and Stogsdill vote no. And the motion carries. Thank you all for a very interesting and intelligent discussion. I learned a lot, especially about tax today. I'm glad you guys got all the hard questions in for Jason because he is overdue for another meeting and is going to leave us. But Jason, we appreciate everything you do for all of us. Okay, we are going to move to, We are going to move to the informational portion of our meeting today, which it deals with post-secondary success. There he is. Dr. Harwood let me know that he might be late, and when I didn't see him, I began to remember that I was supposed to fill in. So you guys are very relieved that he is here, because I did not have to make up something for us to talk about. Dr. Harwood, thank you for being with us today. We'll let you settle in.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So I got here a little while ago, but there was more seating in the other room. So I just started out over there. So we're going to talk about something that there aren't any tax credits involved in. And so Jason answered all those questions, so hopefully none of those come up. The chair asked that I come and talk about post-secondary success, which I'll just start off with, is a state board goal. And it had to do that the state board implemented this. I should have looked at exactly what year it is, but it's looking at how high school students are doing 2 years after they graduate. And so the idea would be is that if the purpose of K-12 education is actually to prepare students. I'll fix it. Got it. Okay, so I'll stay over here. So that if our goal is to to prepare students to be productive citizens, one of the things we want to look at is what they do 2 years later. And so in doing this, we look at something that we call post-secondary success. And what that is looking at what our high school graduates are doing 2 years after they graduate. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we measure that success, and you're going to see some holes in it right away, because we know there are holes in it, and we'll kind of get through those. But that would be if a student earned a industry-recognized credential while they were in high school, that would still count for them being successful 2 years later. If they earn that within 2 years of graduating from high school, or if they are still enrolled or continuously enrolled in a program that they're working on. So it's like if they go to a 4-year college and they come back for their sophomore year, then we're counting them as being successful. And so the way we do that is that we take how many students graduated from high school that year, and then, thank you. There we go. Did I cover all, did I get all the ones up there, post-secondary, both first and second? Yeah. Students with disabilities that meet district graduation requirements. So if we have students that are in an 18 to 21-year-old program, again, because we serve some students with disabilities from birth to age 21, if they are still enrolled in that program, then that would be counted as successful. And so if they've done these, and then you get counted as successful, the state board's goal is 70 to 75%. The reason they set that goal is there was a study done by Georgetown University, and it talked about that the jobs of the future, that between 70 and 75% of them need some form of education beyond high school. So that's why we set the goal that way, because that's what we think Kansas needs in order to help the economy grow. And so to do that, then we take the post-secondary success and we multiply it by the 4-year cohort graduation rate to get an effectiveness rate. And so you can look at this chart, and if you go to Data Central, you can look at this for any school school or district in the state. And what it will show you is the last 5 years of graduation, and then the last 5 years of their post-secondary success. So one of the questions we get a lot is, well, how do you get that information? Well, we get it from a group called the National Clearinghouse. It's important to know that the National Clearinghouse's function is to keep track of when students need to start paying back student loans. So they get information from all of the universities about whether or not people are still enrolled or if they have finished a degree or a certificate. So that's where we get the information. So groups of students that are not counted in this are anybody that joins the military. We don't get any information on them. If they leave high school and start making $1 million a year, they are not getting counted as successful because we don't have any record of that. Now, we're doing some work on that. We're actually, hopefully, in the fall, we will be able to get some information from the U.S. military, hopefully, because we started the process or done the most work on it, along with our federal delegation. We'll be part of a pilot program where we'll start getting some of that information. We have already started working with the Department of Revenue and the Department of Labor to try to pull some of that information together so that we can look at what are the students that are being successful. One of the things we will have to decide at some point is that if you are 20 years old, which is 2 years after you graduated 18, what is a successful wage? And somehow we're going to have to put a number to that and say if you make more than this, you're successful, and if not, then you're not. Which is why I don't like the term post-secondary success. I think it should be something about post-secondary outcomes because, I mean, each student should be kind of gauging their own success. But from a state perspective, if we want to set it at $35,000 for a 20-year-old or $40,000 for a 20-year-old, whatever that would be, $40,000 is a little over $15 an hour, closer to $20 an hour, which could be considered successful. We can set that, and if we have that information, we can add that in here. And that's going to make the numbers increase, because what you'll see is what's happened over the time is our graduation rates have continued to creep up. Our goal there is 95%. But you'll notice that starting in 2020, we've seen a decline in the post-secondary success. And there's a lot that goes into that. One of the issues is that with our graduating class of 2020, a lot of them did not go to college right the first year. And so if they took a year off to do something else because of the pandemic, we're not counting them as successful because they weren't enrolled both years together. So there's some of this we're going to have to look at as the years go by to see if that recovers. We're also seeing that a lot of males that graduate are not going to college. Some of that might be because we've been doing a much better job of helping people understand that there are great careers that don't require a 4-year degree. And that might be fine, but we're also going to have to keep working with the Department of Labor are we getting people into the fields that we need to get them into, and then even the Department of Commerce and the Department to talk about where are those things. And so we can kind of look at how we do some of those things. I think, for instance, this committee talked about the Promise Scholarship, which is a lever that the legislature has to pull that says, we need people to go into this, so we're going to provide this scholarship for people that go into it and then complete it. So those are all the things that we'll need to talk about. This is actually information that we can provide, especially as we work more with the Department of Labor and the Department of Revenue, to give you the kind of information that will help you gauge whether some of those things are being successful. So this would be post-legislative success. We can try to come up with a chart for that too. So with that, I have another chart to talk about, but that's it's kind of actually one more thing to talk about is if you look at an individual school district or school, at the bottom of the chart, you'll see a thing called a confidence interval. So in that situation, what we've done is we've taken student situations that students are in, whether that's poverty, ELL, students with disability, chronic absenteeism, and I think mobility. And based on each district's demographics of students, then we've done a regression analysis to look at what would we predict with the variables that your students have, what yours should be. And so then we have a confidence interval, which I think is 5% one way or the other. And what it looks at is that we would expect you to be here. So again, the goal is 70 to 75%. But if your projected rate is, well, in this case, is 43% or 49%, and that's but you're exceeding that by more than a standard deviation and a half, then that district actually gets what's called the Commissioner's Award. And the idea is there, you're working with students that have some significant needs, and your outcomes, your post-secondary outcomes, are significantly greater, and that would be a standard deviation and a half or more above what was expected. And we try to recognize the districts that are doing that. So again, if you look at this for your own schools, you'll see that confidence interval. So I wanted to make sure that you knew what that was. We don't have one for the state because that would, of course, be the middle. So.
Do you want?
Yeah, I'll do questions on this and we'll move on to the next chart.
Okay, very good. Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks again, your family, Dr. Harwood. So you made a really good point about the class of 2020 and delaying, but I think of all of our rural areas and our kids that just, they work on their family farm and they don't go to college, and I have a hard time not seeing those as success. Is there a way to capture some of that?
So that's where, and that's why I don't like the idea of success. I think it should be post-secondary outcome. But I do think, so that's what we're trying to work with the Department of Labor and the Department of Revenue on, is if a 20-year-old is making a living wage and they're happy doing that, then they should be seen as a positive outcome. We don't have the ability to do that yet. We're working on it. Same thing with military, students that go in the military. There's no way I'm going to say that's unsuccessful, but we don't count them because we don't know where they're at. We get calls from districts all the time about, hey, this student is really successful. They're doing these things. Like, yes, that's true. And you need to be proud of that, but it doesn't fit into our metrics right now, and we're working on that. And the problem with that is that we don't have the capacity to let each district do one-offs on all the rest of the students, so.
Correct. So with that, is that something that you can change internally, or is that the Board of Regents? Is that, the State Board of Ed, or is that something the legislatures need to do? Because I think that's terrible for schools when they produce children that are truly being successful.
I will say that, so one of the things that has been talked about is the statewide longitudinal data system.
Right.
So we're using the one we are building. It was not built to include labor and revenue data. We can do that and tie it back to students. And what we're doing that is through data sharing agreements with those agencies. So we've done it a couple times. We're trying to, the hardest thing right now is mapping the data to make sure that we have the right information with the right students. So we're working on it. It's not ready yet, but that's our goal, is to be able to do that. At this point, I don't know that we need any legislative action. I've talked to Representative Estes about, depending on how this military thing works out and the data sharing agreement there, we may need a change to this Kansas Student Data Privacy Act to make sure that we can enter into agreements that allow us to do some of those things. When we get to that roadblock, we'll bring it to you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you, Frank. And, on occasion, I have been somewhat critical of statistical analysis, and I am excited that if I go to the website that I can see confidence intervals, and I was thrilled. I don't know if you noticed, but when you said those words, my head snapped around, so thank you so much.
The reason I didn't want to go to the next slide is that might make your head spin around, so I'll wait on that one.
Everybody would applaud at that, I think. So,
Representative Brantley and then Pishney.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Harwood. This is kind of I don't know, I believe you guys use the term lifelong learner. And so when you talk about this post-secondary outcomes, I almost have like an endpoint, like, oh, we've made it, but that doesn't really align with the lifelong learner. So I'm going to encourage that maybe this data, since we have a longitudinal system, that we look at that as a pathway of where all of our students, as they are all very different, and we embrace the differences that our students have and encourage them in the pathway that they choose, not an outcome that you're there and done.
So, a little bit of response to that. So, I'm not going to disagree with you. At some point, we had to say, here's the date. We do provide districts with up to 6 years of the national clearinghouse data. And one of the things that we did in my district was look at, we found out that our students were really good at returning for their sophomore year and not so great at graduating. And with the understanding that we have students that I go to college because that's what I think I should do. I'm prepared to go. I make it. I mean, it's not a problem. But 2 years in, it's like, why am I here? And so that's why we talk about things with like the individual plans of study, helping students make the best choices they can before they spend money and maybe go into debt and find out 2 years later, it's like, I just wasted 2 years and this amount of money. Maybe not wasted because that can be a learning experience, but trying to help them have the best information to make those decisions early. The only other thing I would say about that, at some point, that becomes less of a K-12 education issue and maybe some other department that needs to be paying for that part, but we'd be happy to work with them.
Yes, you may.
I absolutely agree with you. And I also think you mentioned a very important point there, that instead of students going, and we know the averages, they change their majors maybe up to 4 times, but instead of taking that pathway and spending the money, they're maybe waiting until they know exactly what they want to do. So I commend you on that idea. Thank you.
Representative Pishney?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being with us again, once again. I want to throw out a thought for you that may help with whether it's outcomes or success or whatever you titled that. There's a community college within Kansas that I will not name at this point that has a mission statement that states, "We exist to produce positive contributors to the economic and social well-being of society." And a positive contributor could be someone right after high school, and I understand what you're saying as far as what you can do and can't do at this point, but it might be someone who's been in school or working 2 years down the road. So just to throw that out to prompt thought with regard to the outcomes and success terminology you're talking about. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. And I'm really glad we're having this discussion. Did anybody else have a comment? Representative Chauncey?
Yeah, just real quick on that, I guess, I mean, this is a 2-year after graduation, correct? Do we do anything for the kids that don't want to go to post-secondary schools or to vocational schools? Do we do anything prior to graduation in questioning, say the kid wants to go work in the construction industry or wants to go work? Do we evaluate that data, and is that factored into this equation of determining success?
No, and actually that's the part that we're still, so let me go back. So yes, most districts have programs that would help that student be prepared for that career when they leave high school. I mean, that could be an OSHA certification, that can be some technical training. We have districts where you can get a welding certification. If it was a certification where you actually had an industry recognized certificate, then yes, they get counted on this. If you want to go into work in the construction industry, we don't count the level 1 OSHA certification because even though that might be a job requirement, we don't see that as high wage, high demand enough. And what we can't capture now are the ones that go out and get a really good job as a construction laborer who will work into either through a union or whatever else, and to be a carpenter or a plumber, whatever that is. We don't capture those unless they actually get their certificate. And that's the wage and labor data that we really need to work on to say, this is what's going on, and now we have a better indicator of who's moving towards that kind of success.
Yes, you may.
I was just curious about that because, I mean, I know there's a lot of kids that go to high school and they make $15, $18, $20 an hour working construction. I mean, I build houses, I know that, and there's a constant demand with every contractor I know that needs laborers, and that's why I was just curious. A lot of them are a lot more willing to hire the kid right out of high school because they don't have the bad habits. They can teach them stuff and train them the proper ways as we see fit to do that. So I was just curious as to.
And like I said, we don't capture that student yet, but that's what we want to be able to do.
Representative Ruiz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As far as those lines go, how do you track, or do you track the homeschool kids?
We do not, because we don't have any records on them.
Virtual school kids, you track them through the.
So if they are enrolled in a public virtual school, then we would have that information, yes.
Okay, I see a gap there, but thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we can only keep track of the students we have data on.
Dr. Harwood, thank you very much. You touched on a subject I'm very passionate about, because we heard a bill, the Align bill and data. I appreciate the comments that other members have made that says, hey, we want to be very accurate in measuring, and to me, the success is on us. Did we properly educate this child so they have a chance to move forward in life and be a happy and productive citizen in our state? And I think it is fair to look at some things, but when we consider the Align bill, I want to make sure that as you guys are moving forward with your project, and the digital CUME folders and some of the other departments in the state are redoing their websites, that we are making sure we make it easy to talk to each other electronically and get the data that will give us actually really good, valuable information. And you're welcome to respond to that.
So, and actually, this was a little bit even in response to Representative Steele's. When I was asked about the Align bill, because it's come up, I don't know, at least 3 years in a row, my response is, if the legislature is interested in that, because it comes up, we talk about it during the legislative session and it goes away. That could be a good interim committee. And I think if you did that, what you need to do is have the legislature kind of talk about what is the information that we need to be able to make the decisions we want to be able to make. And then you have the agencies talk about, well, here's the information that we have. And then we can start talking about, well, what do we need to do to turn data that the agencies have into information the legislature can use. Now, I will say that the Department of Education, I believe, and I don't know everything about all the rest of the agencies, is probably best suited to kind of spearhead some of that, because we already have the IT infrastructure for it. We didn't build our system to do all of those things. So we probably would say, well, we're going to need some time and money to get those things together, to put them together. It would be less than the fiscal note on the Align bill, because that was starting from scratch, and we're not starting from scratch. But our mission was not to do all of the things that the legislature may do, but we're probably the agency best situated to move that forward.
Thank you very much. We'll move, anybody else, last chance for questions on this slide? And we'll move forward to the next one. Thank you, Dr. Harwood. All
right, so I'm going to start with this. This is titled correlation data, but no correlations were actually harmed in the put this together. These are actually just averages, but it shows a correlation, though not a statistical correlation, between what's happening. And so the question comes up a lot is, if we're doing this post-secondary success, how does that translate back to state assessment scores? Because I have never been asked about, in my adult life, what my state assessment scores were. And so now, on the other side of that, as a superintendent, I talked about if the state assessments measure the standards and the standards are what we're teaching, we should be paying attention to them, but what do they really mean? And so what we started looking at is we took students and we divided the 4 categories into 8. So we just split them in half. And so then we looked at, for the students that were in that category in 10th grade, and you can see for 3 years, 17, 18, and 19, what happened to them 2 years after graduation. Now, this is the same chart, if anybody was here last year, because we don't have 2020 data because we didn't give a 2020 state assessment. So 2024 would be the students that would have taken the 10th grade assessment in 2020. We just don't have comparison. We'll pick it up again next year. And so when you look at this and you look at low level 1, so these are students that scored in the bottom half of level 1, they still have a 72% graduation rate. They average a 16.5 or 16 to 17% of them are in that what's considered that success rate. That's probably not surprising because they probably aren't going to four-year universities, but it doesn't mean they don't have good jobs and are earning, and that's the part we're missing there. And they got between a 13.5 and a 13.7 on the ACT. When you move into the upper part of level 1, you see a big jump in the graduation rates and almost a doubling in post-secondary success. And then when you move into level 2, now we're at graduation rates of above 90%, and then we're in the 40s and 50% on post-secondary support, and we're up to 17 and 18 on the ACT. So even lower level 2, when we start talking about that, are seeing success at what we're starting to get back to a more a level that we might see as more acceptable. And then as you keep going up, you'll notice that even at the highest of level 4, we still have people that don't graduate. And there are a lot of reasons why that happens. But you'll see that post-secondary success is 83 and 85% because these are the students that are going on to, I mean, some of them might have gone to the military, so we didn't get to count them. Some of them, again, might be those entrepreneurs that are already making their second million and we didn't count them. But most of them, you'll see, are probably those are the students that are in four-year universities. And they went back for their sophomore year. And they averaged a 30 or better on the ACT, which probably put them in a pretty good place to get scholarship money towards those things. So one of the things we look at this for is that we've already started looking at taking it backwards down to lower grades. And I think what we're going to find is that the lower the grade you go, the better that is as a predictor of post-secondary success. And part of the reason we get into this, we hear all the time that sophomores don't care about this test. It doesn't mean anything to them. They all answer A or C or whatever that is. So some of this is what we're seeing is that on especially the sophomore assessment, we're not really sure that the state assessment is a really good indicator of what they know and can do. Because they can go on even some of these areas and perform much higher. So it's all those things that we're looking at to see, how do those things tie together. At the early grades, the state assessments again, as a third grader, you're going to do the best you can because your third grade teacher asked you to do it. I mean, that's one of those things you get into. On state assessments, you always see a drop wherever you move from elementary to middle school. And that has to do with you went from the teacher that you had all the time that you had a great relationship with to one of 6 or 7 teachers. And so you start losing some of that. And we've got to work through some of those things as well. But that's what we want to look at is how does that correlate? And we actually could do a correlation at some point. How does that correlate to post-secondary success, which is, when you look at it, has to be our mission. State assessments cannot be our goal. We can measure goals around state assessments, but performing well on the state assessment is not the outcome we're looking for. Being successful citizens is what we're trying to do. And we think that this post-secondary success is getting us in the right direction to look at metrics that we can take backwards and then predict forward with student performance.
Were you finished, Dr. Hart?
I'm finished, yes.
Okay. Representative McNorton.
So we've talked about this before in other committees and stuff. So without knowing what success is, maybe I answer my own question. So we don't know what a 1, never mind, I'm good.
Yeah, and so, I mean, to kind of, go to articulate what I think your question is that these students that are level 1, I mean, being in level 1 says that you have limited ability to interact with grade level material. And so, and it says that, and be college and career ready. So we're not surprised that these students are not getting post-secondary certificates and going on to post-secondary. So we need to work on that. That's not okay. What we need to make sure is that if they choose to do the job that doesn't count for us, that they have the skills to do that. and that's what they want to do. So that's where we put in this kind of these measurements of post-secondary success, the individual plans of study, and then other measurements as we're going on to get students into the programs that will prepare them for what they want to do to be successful. And hopefully that is a high-waged, high-demand career. Because wanting to, I mean, we have students that, if you go to 6th grade and you talk about individual plans of study, the most common things are professional athlete, professional entertainer, or social media influencer. There are very few, I mean, that's a small group of people that probably are very successful, but we try to help them, okay, so what's the backup plan? And so what happens, you know, let's explore that a little. What are the things that you like to do and you're good at? And then how can we help you develop a plan for, I can earn a living for a lifestyle that is what I want.
Additional questions, Representative Chauncey?
Just real quick, I guess, it's a 2-year post-secondary education study, correct? We're seeing where the kids are at 2 years after they get out. But my question then becomes, we consider it successful if they're still in college after 2 years. But I know a lot of kids will change their major 3, 4, 5 times and still not know what they want to do. And then they may ultimately wind up dropping out of college with $50,000 in student loan debts that we may or may not forgive. So my question becomes, how is that a major success when I know you're still enrolled in the school, but you're not actually doing anything productively in society except for getting your own education, trying to get yourself ready to become successful. So you're not technically really successful then, are we?
So again, this goes back a little bit to Representative Brantley's question. We had to set a time at some point. So we put 2 years in there and we said if you were still enrolled. As a superintendent, when we got the data that had 6 years in there, we started looking at, so did they graduate within 6 years? And if they didn't, what happened? And that's when we started looking at, okay, who are the students that are doing that? And how can we go back with their individual plans of study and help them make a better choice? Now, we don't make, I mean, the schools don't make the choice for them. So if they've said, I'm going to go to college because that's what my parents are making me do, whatever it is. I mean, I think the school was successful if they were able to make it through their freshman year and then they were able to return. So that's one of the ways we look at that, is that they may not have been happy with where they were, but from a school measure, they were able to get to where they said they were going when they were with us. And so some of it gets into that. Now, for that student, that probably was not successful, but whose choice was that? And so now we're getting into, we can't, we're going to try to help them make the best decision they can, but we don't make the decision for them.
Representative Hill, then Schmoy, and then myself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Harwood, a couple things looking at this. I think, you know, you made the comment about student apathy. I think we can make the assumption that all students would have essentially an equal level of apathy. So our correlations can still be relatively valid on that. I think it might hurt your overall levels or overall height of your bars, but probably not your correlation. I think if I was looking at this, you know, just without putting any kind of model to it, just a brief look, I would say it looks like there probably is some sort of correlation between the state assessments and the ACT scores. It looks pretty solid. It doesn't look like there's anything between post-secondary success and graduation rate, but there probably is between ACT scores. And I know the state board has talked about going to a different assessment model. And I think one of the things that legislators and maybe State Board of Education members can be assured of is that if you can establish a good correlation like this between maybe the ASVAB or the ACT or something that students might take, I mean, ASVAB, for instance, students might take a pretty vested interest in that test because it has a vocational component to it too. That maybe a different assessment might be an accurate indicator of where we would be scoring on these other tests, but also maybe a more meaningful test for students. Do you have any comments on that?
I will say that after we kind of had that conversation, what Representative Hill is referring to is Dr. Watson at probably the February State Board meeting proposed to the board the idea that we could explore doing away with the 10th grade state assessment. Just so you know, in order to do that, we'd have to get a waiver from the federal government. And then with the idea that as opposed to the state assessment, the students would take the ACT, the ASVAB, or the ACT work keys, which is more a measurement of workforce readiness. And they would choose that assessment based on their individual plan of study. So based on where they think they were going, they would take the assessment that best indicated their level of readiness for that. And so if you're going to go to a four-year school, you take the ACT. If you're going to go into the workplace or a career, maybe even some of the certificate things might be work keys. If you're going to the military, it'd be ASVAB. I had a conversation with Chair Estes about this, and she said, I'm not sure if I like that idea. Some of it was because of this chart and how things work. So that's why we started looking at, well, let's look at 8th grade. And so we're working on the same information on 8th grade. We looked at that and we saw that, well, the graduation rate then for the level 1 went down. And so now we're taking it backwards to see, well, maybe that is a better predictor. And so looking at some of those things. So I think you are correct. There should be a strong correlation between state assessment scores and the ACT. The problem we have with getting a better correlation with the post-secondary success is we are not measuring a big chunk of places where you would think students that didn't do well on the state assessment might find success, and that would be in the labor data and the military data.
Representative Schmoy.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I was just thinking about kids that don't test well and, you know, how your brain kind of hops from one thing to another. When we're talking about the post-secondary success and testing and things like that, I think of all the kids that I've worked with over the years and all of the young people that I've worked with over the years that were terrible at school and taking tests and then went on to do amazing things. And one of the things that I'm wondering is, we just recently had a bill, and if it gets through, then we've got 20-year-olds that can be hired as a police officer and start academy. Will we be able to use them enrolling in police academy as part of the success story for them? So
the answer is yes, but we're probably not capturing it now. So the problem we have now is that if you, I don't know, if you get a industry certificate and so you get your police license, I don't know if we're capturing those or not, but it would make sense that if they're able to do that yes, that would, now we might be able to look at that if you're in the academy. The problem is the police academy probably doesn't report to National Clearinghouse because they don't get federal funding. So once we get some of those military, then we're going to get to the next group of, well, now we have this, 4% of people that are in this thing. How can we capture that? So I think every time we plug one hole of a group we're not capturing, we're going to see the next larger group. But I mean, it goes back to the point. That seems like it would be productive, a member of society. So why wouldn't we count that as being successful?
Okay. Yeah, I would very, very much like to see that if we're sending young people into academy, that would be captured somewhere in here.
So one of the things that we can talk about as well is that if we can get the data captured well from revenue and labor, then we can tell you how many students went into this field or this field or this field. What we're having now is that all of our data sets are very different. And so bringing them together is very labor intensive because you get a lot of mismatch and you kind of have to figure it out. So that's where if there was more of a statewide look at that, and so then the police academies were reporting to somebody that here are our enrollments, then we could capture that and count it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I want to touch on a couple of things. I think the success that we're trying to measure here is how did we do by the students? And yes, there are other ways to measure success, but I think the credentials are really important because we have always said jobs are getting more and more skilled. And when students leave us, whether, we've done some things where we help some students get credentials while they're in high school, or they do some other things afterwards, that credential actually is very important because it helps them to qualify for that highly skilled job. And I appreciate having the ACT scores on here because I think it does show a correlation. And I know we're not really able to lay over the NAEP scores because it's a small sample, it's every other year. But I am concerned about the continuing growth in the gap between our higher level students are moving up in their NAEP scores and our level 1s and 2s are kind of declining is what I suspect based on the gap in our average scores on NAEP. And it tells me we still have a lot of work to do. And that we're all part of solving that problem. But I'm deeply concerned by that. And you mentioned the term workforce ready, and I'm looking at your slide here, and I'm looking at the ACT scores, and I see that basically you have to be a high 2 to get an ACT score that's going to get you into college, because most colleges are at an 18 and a 20, and a low 2 has a 17 in there. So that makes me concerned about the proportion of where we are on not enough of our students being ready. And I think we'll continue those conversations. We all have a lot of hard work to do.
And though I think post-secondary success, or however we call it, is a really important measure for us as a state to look at, because it is a much better predictor of the future health of the state than state assessment scores are. I think we've talked about several times that the number of students in level 1 across the board is concerning and something that has to be worked on. The only thing we're talking about this is 10th grade may be a different animal than elementary when it comes to that. I think we can look at those things differently. But again, the state board has approved standards that districts are supposed to be teaching to, and the state assessment is supposed to be measuring those standards. I've told when I worked in a school, until somebody can show me that either we don't care about those standards or that is not actually measuring those standards, we have to pay attention to this and help our students move ahead. So we are in agreement with that. The current level of success is not, of students at level 1 is not acceptable. I think what districts are struggling with is that here are the things we're doing and we're not seeing the gains we think we should. What do we need to do differently? And that's one of the things that we are trying to help them with.
And I appreciate that conversation. You guys don't know poor Dr. Harwood and Gabby were in my office quite late last night as we talked about some of the things that we could try differently and maybe different ways to use our at-risk funds, because I truly believe what we're doing isn't working. We have a lot of good people at the table, but we have to figure out how we do better, and coming up with that solution together is important in that. It is 3 o'clock, but I want to give last call for questions for Dr. Harwood. Seeing none, we'll let you off the hot seat, and thank you very much for preparing this for today and spending time with us. Anything from anybody else for the good of the order? Seeing none, we are adjourned exactly at 3 o'clock.